Oh, filthy swines. That was most bizarre because that plane, it sounded very strange. Let's see if I can get a close up on it. I can't get it, can I? Well, damn it. This morning I looked up and I thought to myself, beautiful, we've got a lovely blue sky. So when I looked out my window, as I came outside to celebrate what a beautiful blue sky we had, I could see, obviously, this fresh chemtrail that's just been laid. But what really got me a little bit like, oh dear, here we go, is of course this electromagnetic frequency signature here in the sky. It's just typical that we should have a beautiful morning ruined yet again by the military-industrial complex. Very, very disheartening, but typical. Typical because the military-industrial complex is merely a tool of the oligarchy, of the obscenely rich elites who control governments, and governments are allowing and have been helping, researching and developing weather and climate modification. And now they are using such technologies to con the masses into believing that we have a climate threat. And this is a global scenario that requires global action, global responses. In fact, requires globalization, global governance. It really is the threat that the whole world has been waiting for, to unify it. When Ronald Reagan was governor of California in the 70s, he was actually presiding over weather modification programs. He was also outed in the 60s as a communist. Well, interestingly, later he became, look at that plane there, ugh. Ronald Reagan became President of the United States of America, of course. And whilst he was in office, on 8 separate occasions, he built into his speeches about how he has often thought that we need an exterior threat, like perhaps if extraterrestrials were attacking the planet, then that would be the situation that would bring the whole world together. Well, that existential threat now is climate change, and that is the manufactured scenario they are using to convince the world we have this existential threat which must require the global responses, which in effect will bring about global governance, which is this factor that Ronald Reagan was talking about, some global threat that will bring the people of the world together so that they can form their one world government. This is their goal. And they have now got the technology which they've been developing for over 100 years, involving vapor trails as one. And now there's a guy who wrote a paper in 1970 on the possibilities of weather modification with aircraft contrails. William M. McRae. And he was stating that the ice crystals that are formed in the contrails are as efficient at cloud seeding for weather modification purposes as dry ice CO2. Now we see a massive formation in the creation of contrails. Now Metabunk and all of the so-called establishment, they say that's just because it's an increased volume of aircraft. But the interesting thing is, we didn't see these types of contrails under the busiest air corridors, which were serving the busiest airports in the world, through the 1960s, 70s and 80s and 90s even. Little bit of a problem with that theory, it's just extra planes. Because some of us did live underneath those busy air corridors. And we didn't see this. But we do know there are many examples of contrails. Many situations where planes were making contrails, even during the Second World War. But a lot of those during the Second World War were due to anti-detonation injection. That's water methanol injection. And planes would use this for extra war power. And interestingly, the way to make clouds and smoke for the Hollywood film sets was by using heated water and alcohol, which is what water and methanol is when it's injected into the engines. You get smoke trails, and in fact I've read articles that state the planes using water methanol injection would get thick white trails. Not just that, I've read accounts from engineers from Pratt and Whitney. Frank, I can't think of his second name at the moment, where they tested the engines using water injection for up to 100 hours. But the government stipulated they wanted them to be able to run for 7 hours. So yeah, this is why we were seeing a lot of contrails then. But it was noted in 1945 that contrails could be used for weather modification because they, in the right atmospheric conditions, they can trigger a huge response that could blanket out the sky in a matter of minutes. So they understood this and have been pursuing to understand it. The military-industrial complex involves many different types of corporations which are actually really owned by the same banking groups and hedge funds and organisations, these stock market companies that own everything. So the military-industrial complex is expansive. Just look at this sky. There's a guy from Radio Corporation of America called David Sarnoff, the director. In 1946 he was making several different statements in newspapers to on radio shows saying that he would be able to control the weather with radio waves. Well, look at all the waves we're seeing in the sky. Isn't this electromagnetic frequency having an effect in the atmosphere? Now it is known, and it's not disputed, that contrails and the contrail cirrus clouds that they create trap in heat. There is a net effect of warming. This is understood. So there's people who may be confused and think that these extra contrails are actually about solar radiation management. That means blocking out the sun's rays. At this altitude, they are actually, when they're thin and wispy like this, they allow the sun's shortwave radiation to penetrate through, but they block the infrared longwave radiation from the heated surface from moving out. So these have a net effect of warming at this altitude. So no, this isn't a desperate attempt, secretly, by a benevolent government to try and rescue us from some dire global meltdown scenario. Not at all. This is merely a part of a long-term program to control the weather and climate, but they are doing it covertly so that the effects of drought, floods, and changes in the weather patterns can be blamed on climate change, the climate change agenda. Now, no one is denying climate change because climate change happens all the time. And in fact, we have been warmer many times before. You can't have up to 6,000 Vikings living in Greenland for 400 years, growing their own crops so they can make their own beer and have their own trees so they can cook and heat themselves for 400 years unless it was warmer. Well, scientific evidence supports that. It's warmer than today. So don't worry about the dire global meltdown because the Earth goes through lots of cycles and we have been warmer before. That's not the issue. What we need to be concerned is this drive to erode our sovereignty, to create a one world government system which will be a green communist system, a socialist totalitarian system. Now they think they're going to succeed where they've failed in other nations before because of technology, because they want to implement a scientific dictatorship. And you would imagine with the Internet of Things and transhumanism and nanotechnology and the actual visible effects that we can see in the sky, which must suggest they can already control the weather and climate, at least they are developing the ability to do this, then they must feel very confident that the technology will mean that they will succeed with their incredible communist plans. The Rothschilds, the Royals, the Rockefellers, they were all behind communism in the beginning. They were the ones behind it, and now they're the ones driving Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. And they're also the owners of big oil. So there's a confusing factor, isn't it? Because anyone who's a climate skeptic and who's a climate scientist gets instantly labelled that they're in the pay from big oil. But ridiculously enough, if you just do a little bit of research, you will find out that those who own big oil are also those pushing the climate crisis so that the world will adopt Agenda 21, 2030 and UN post-2015 agenda and everything else. So there's big oil is behind Agenda 21. Very mixed message from the establishment's pet activist organisation called Greenpeace, who are solar radiation management stakeholder partners in the Solar Radiation Management Governance Initiative. They're sellouts. Greenpeace are just there to manufacture consent from the public to do their stunts, like putting gas masks on Nelson's column. Does anyone really believe they could get away with getting up in this age of anti-terrorism and the police? There's plenty of police around landmarks in London. Do you think that they could really have not managed to get up a 52-metre high column and put this mask on without the authority to do so from the establishment? Of course, all their stunts, like the one where they went round the oil refinery, putting their posters up willy-nilly all over the place. Do we really believe that Greenpeace can get away with these stunts? It's like an open door policy at the top levels. MI6 or MI5 obviously have to be involved. It's ridiculous that people can believe that they're genuine. And maybe they do have a lot of genuine followers. And genuine operatives who are sucked in and believe all the nonsense, but really they are working for the oligarchy to shape public opinion. And what we are witnessing here, my friends, is the visible effects of a very long-term program to fool the public. It's time to wake up, my friends, because they actually have to have our consent in order to succeed with their horrendous plans. We really are talking about a 0.1% of people here. This insane oligarchy that want to dominate and rule the world. Everybody wants to rule the world. I don't think everybody wants to rule the world, but this 0.1% certainly does. And they have created wars, they have created famines, they have bankrupted nations. They are an evil, psychopathic, sociopathic, dominant minority that are really quite sick, and these people are running our world, and we need to change that. We need to remove these people. It's time to wake up. Take care, my friends. Bye for now.